Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a really powerful theory today. It promises to give you back control in those moments, where you feel rejected, dismissed, or genuinely disrespected.
Yeah.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. That control, it really only materializes if you understand and, crucially, execute both halves of what we're calling the power equation.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about intercepting that immediate kind of painful sting of being left out or ignored and making sure that pain doesn't define your next move.
Precisely. And this material, it provides an incredible roadmap, really, for understanding our deeply conditioned reactions when external actions make us feel invisible or less than or excluded.
Right.
And that initial, almost instantaneous reaction, that's the whole game, isn't it?
It's
Because it
yeah.
dictates who walks away holding the psychological power in that interaction.
Yeah.
So our focus isn't just on analyzing why those moments hurt so much, although we'll touch on that. It's really about detailing specific, practical strategies for quickly recovering that essential sense of control. And, importantly, reinforcing your self-worth without getting defensive or isolated.
Okay, so our mission today is pretty laser focused. We want to move you, the listener, from feeling defined and kind of overwhelmed by other people's actions, their silence, their dismissal, their choices,
Yeah, all that external stuff.
to being fully empowered by the actions you choose next. So we're going to meticulously detail this two-part system, the now pretty well-known protective strategy called Let Them,
Mm-hmm.
and the absolutely critical second half, the part that actually drives fulfillment, which we're calling Let Me.
And to make this really real, we're going straight to those painful high-stakes scenarios, the ones that trigger this, like massive loss of control. We're starting with the professional sting, being ignored in a work meeting.
Oh, yeah.
The bewildering and, frankly, cruel violence of being ghosted while dating. And that acute private pain of being excluded by friends.
Mm-hmm.
These moments are painful because, well, our internal narrative just defaults straight to self-blame the second they happen.
Let's start right there then in the realm of internalized dismissal. Because the sheer speed, the speed at which we take an external action and interpret it as evidence of our own internal flaw, that's the root of this entire problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's almost instantaneous.
I think every single person listening right now has felt this particular kind of professional sting. You've prepared, maybe you even stayed up late working on something, you're in a key meeting,
Yep.
you pitch an idea, one that you've put serious thought into, it has potential, you feel ready, like you're contributing something meaningful.
But then what happens? The room goes quiet.
Definitely quiet sometimes.
Or there might be a smattering of those polite, non-committal nods, which, as you said, sometimes feels even worse than direct criticism.
It
Right?
really does.
Then, almost immediately, someone else pivots the discussion. They go to a completely different idea, maybe one that's way less fleshed out, or they just circle back to the status quo, and your idea, that they cared about, it just vanishes into the professional ether.
Poof. And before you even register that, like, temperature change in the room, the immediate internal spiral has already begun. Your mind just goes into overdrive, searching for the fault. You feel profoundly invisible. You start second-guessing every single detail. Did I use the right metrics? Should I have made a visual aid? Maybe I just don't have the gravitas to be heard here.
Yeah, the self-doubt kicks in hard.
And this whole thought pattern, it culminates in that really destructive self-assessment. Maybe I'm just not smart enough. Maybe I can't contribute meaningfully here.
That right there, that is the textbook core mechanism of surrendering your power.
Yeah.
The external dismissal, them just moving on, which, let's be honest, might be a strategic choice on their part. Or maybe they're just distracted. Who knows?
Right, it could be anything.
But it's instantly converted into internal self-doubt. You immediately use their lack of interest as evidence to question your fundamental worth as a contributor. It's an instant, hugely unconscious conflation of your output with your identity.
It's a huge cognitive leap, isn't it? And this is where the analytical rigor of the sources we looked at is crucial. The actual value of your idea or your fundamental competence, it doesn't change based on their strategy choice or their momentary priorities.
Exactly.
They might have chosen a different path for reasons completely unrelated to your idea's quality. Maybe it's budget, maybe it's internal politics, maybe they had a bad breakfast.
Right, could be anything.
But we instantly interpret their choice as proof of our inadequacy. We just conflate the two instantly, and that's where the real damage starts.
And we see this phenomenon just as brutally, sometimes even more so in our personal lives. The dating scenario, that's a perfect, really modern example. The ghosting sting.
Ah, yes. The ghosting sting.
It is so prevalent because it essentially weaponizes ambiguity against our very natural human need for certainty.
Oh, it's the worst. You've been invested, right? You've been texting someone, the conversations felt like they were actually going somewhere, maybe even getting intimate, and you genuinely believed, like, okay, this is moving forward.
Yeah, there's potential here.
Then, without any warning, just sudden, unexplained, complete silence, they've just vanished like they never existed.
And the human mind absolutely hates a vacuum, especially an emotional one like that. So the temptation in that moment is overwhelming. If the sources describe it almost like a physical pain driving this need for resolution.
Yeah, you feel it in your
You
chest.
feel this intense, sometimes irrational urge to text them again, maybe just to prove the line is still working, or maybe just desperate to get that single word of closure that explains the void.
Or just any response.
Right. And you start replaying every conversation, analyzing every timestamp, scrutinizing every emoji, trying desperately to find the fault, that tiny thing you think you said or did that must have broken the connection.
You know, I wonder if that search for fault is actually deep down a desperate attempt to regain control. Like, if I can just isolate the mistake, then I know how to fix it next time, right? So it won't happen again.
That is precisely the trap. You are investing incredibly valuable emotional and cognitive energy into chasing the why behind their immature or, frankly, disrespectful behavior.
Right.
We need to shift that focus entirely. Instead of asking, why did they stop communicating? The powerful internal question becomes, why do I want to continue investing my time and energy in someone who behaves this way? Someone who chooses total disrespect and disregard over simple, basic human communication. That shift protects your energy. It
Yeah.
really does.
But the shift has to be deliberate, doesn't it? You can't control their failure to communicate, but you retain full control over processing your own emotions and, more importantly, reinforcing your own standard for self-respect.
Exactly.
If they can't provide basic communication, they have effectively disqualified themselves from having a significant place in your life. That feels like the critical pivot right there.
And that leads us beautifully to the ultimate pain point shared in the material, the exclusion scenario, the one we refer to as the couch reaction. This is seeing actual evidence of exclusion, often in real time.
Oh, this one is deeply relatable. You're just at home, maybe chilling, watching TV, scrolling through social media like you do, and boom, there are the photos.
Yep.
A group of friends, maybe even your core social group, on some fantastic weekend trip they clearly planned without you. And it's not just mild disappointment, it's an immediate, visceral, like punch in the gut emotional reaction.
That wave of negative feelings just hits instantly. Profound insecurity, feeling deeply left out, feeling like you are fundamentally less important or less valued than everyone else in that picture.
Yeah.
And immediately, that destructive internal thought process kicks in, often louder than any rational voice. I must have done something wrong. I must be a bad friend. Why wasn't I invited? What's wrong with me?
But the really profound insight the sources draw here is this. The person experiencing this hurt has essentially inflicted it upon themselves through their interpretation.
The friends didn't actually do anything to the narrator in that sense. They were simply living their lives. They are allowed to plan a weekend with whomever they want in whatever grouping they choose. The narrator hurt themselves by the way they reacted and internalized that situation as definitive proof of their own flaw or defect.
That distinction, the external event versus the internal meaning we assign, that is the essential threshold we absolutely must cross before we can even introduce the solution. The external event, like the trip, the ghosting, the ignored pitch, it's actually emotionally neutral until we assign a meaning to it.
Like, I am worthless or I am unlovable.
Exactly. And once we assign that negative self-blaming meaning, the power shifts immediately, instantly, away from us and into their hands, whether they know it or want it. We have surrendered control over our own emotional state.
Okay, so if the moment we internalize dismissal, the power just drains away from us. How do we stop that internal slide? How do we intercept that wave of negative emotion and keep the power securely with us?
This is where that initial concept of let them becomes our absolutely indispensable psychological tool.
Let them is fundamentally a declaration of a boundary. It's the conscious, decisive act of recognizing that hard line between what is and what isn't in your control.
Okay.
It's a deliberate choice to steady yourself, to sort of emotionally detach from the outcome of their action, and crucially, to prevent that emotional spiral from ever really beginning.
So when you silently declare, like, let them dismiss my idea or let them ghost me, what are you actually saying internally?
You're fundamentally saying, I will not allow your choice, your action, your opinion to define my worth or dictate my emotional stability. It's drawing a line in the sand for yourself.
I think the most helpful component the research offers here is that fantastic visual analogy, the playground seesaw. We
Yeah.
probably need to spend a little more time visualizing this because it shows exactly, almost physically, where we lose our footing.
The seesaw is just an unparalleled visual tool for this. It illustrates the shifting power balance between two people, or even between you and a distressing situation, so clearly. Let's break down scenario A. The situation without using the power of let them. This is the default.
Okay, the default. So in this scenario, someone acts to exclude or dismiss you. Let's use the friends planning the trip without you again. You react negatively. You pick up what we're calling these heavy emotions.
Right. These are powerful, heavy internal weights. Crippling jealousy, deep insecurity, or those destructive self-blaming thoughts like, I must be inferior to them, or there's something wrong with me.
And this negative, heavy internal interpretation,
Yeah.
that's the mechanism that weighs you down.
Exactly. It doesn't weigh them down at all. It only weighs you down. It immediately tips the scales heavily in their favor, whether they realize it or not, by internalizing their actions or their thoughts or their feelings as definitive evidence that you are somehow flawed or a lesser person.
You've handed them the power.
You have effectively gifted them immense unwarranted power over your emotional life. The seesaw dynamic shifts violently. You feel inferior beneath them, less than, while they symbolically rise above you. Those heavy, self-destructive thoughts are the literal psychological weight that causes you to sink down.
Okay, wow. Now compare that really debilitating experience to scenario B. The instant you consciously decide to say, let them, you are actively choosing not to pick up those heavy internal weights of self-blame or jealousy or comparison.
Exactly. When you activate let them, you are consciously freeing yourself from that emotional and cognitive burden. It is the mental equivalent of pushing yourself off the ground with your full strength on the seesaw.
Okay, I see that.
The moment you declare that their action is fundamentally about them, their priorities, their flaws, their choices, and crucially, not proof of your personal defect, you rise up. And the other person or situation symbolically goes down, or at least levels out.
The power dynamic shifts back.
Immediately. Back to equilibrium, or maybe even tilts slightly in your favor, because you are no longer burdened by the need for their approval or their validation. You've taken that weight off your side.
And the immediate emotional benefit of this detachment, it's undeniable, isn't it? It feels magnificent sometimes to rise above. You get that instantaneous emotional jolt. The source material describes it as generating this temporary, almost false sense of superiority and powerful confidence.
Yeah, it's like a little rush.
You feel wiser, strangely detached, maybe even weirdly above the whole petty fray.
And that temporary psychological high,
Yep.
that, let's call it false sense of superiority, that's precisely what makes this initial detachment phase so appealing and honestly so easily addictive.
Right.
It acts as a highly effective temporary tool to help you process painful or just deeply frustrating experiences. Think about dealing with chronic, low-level stuff. A lazy roommate who consistently leaves dishes stacked high.
Oh, I've been there.
Or a rude, demanding customer you have to deal with repeatedly at work. Or that friend who just takes, like, 3 weeks to return your call every single time.
Right, those constant little annoyances.
When facing those, let them is profoundly useful. It immediately helps you move through the initial wave of emotion because just for a moment, you feel sort of better than the source of the frustration. You accept what's happening because you've created an immediate internal boundary and regained a sense of control.
So that moment of power, it's incredibly useful for navigating the initial sting and realizing that you can, in fact, move on without completely spiraling.
It relieves the pressure valve instantly. It allows you to stabilize yourself before that emotional spiral really takes hold. But, and this is huge, but this stabilization is precisely where the danger begins. This powerful tool is only a temporary shield. If you mistake this stabilization for the actual solution, you run headfirst into what we're calling the isolation trap.
This feels like the pivot point, where the research goes from, standard self-help affirmation to genuine, deeper insight. You've successfully pushed off the ground on the seesaw, you've experienced that powerful jolt of superiority, and you're feeling better.
For the moment.
But then, as the source material so pointedly asks, okay, now what? Where do you actually go from here?
Because that initial rush, it fades pretty rapidly, and you realize you're kind of metaphorically sitting up there looking down on other people. You are detached, yes, which was the goal initially, but you're also emotionally stranded in your temporary superiority.
Stranded. That's a good word.
The primary goal Avoiding the pain of rejection was achieved. But genuine fulfillment, connection, joy,
Hmm.
they're nowhere in sight from up there. The narrator of the material shared the profound difficulty here. Saying let them was actually the easy part, the defensive move. Detaching felt great.
Yeah, it's instantly rewarding.
But figuring out how to then re-engage with the world constructively from that place, that was difficult and initially far less rewarding.
Okay, I hear you, but honestly, when I'm hurting, that feeling of moral superiority, it feels like an armored shield. It feels safe up there. Why is it so incredibly hard to put that shield down and embrace the vulnerability of the next step, the let me part, when let them feels so immediately protective?
That is the essential psychological struggle, isn't it?
Yeah.
The shield of moral superiority absolutely protects you from immediate pain, but it also physically blocks all attempts at genuine intimacy and connection. It keeps everything out, the good and bad.
Right.
So if your strategy consists only of saying, let them, to every potentially slighting situation, every little annoyance, every exclusion, it inevitably leads to a sense of increased and, frankly, dangerous isolation. You start to withdraw or you shut down socially because you're constantly placing yourself above the fray, judging others for their perceived flaws while maybe hiding your own.
Okay, let's revisit that friendship scenario again, the Kaus reaction. If the narrator has strictly stopped at let them after seeing those photos, what would the specific isolating behaviors have actually looked like over the following weeks or months?
Well, they would have remained fixed in that kind of cold, detached superiority. They almost certainly wouldn't have reached out to those friends because reaching out would feel like needing them, right? Which contradicts that feeling of superiority.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They would have likely gossiped about the friends to others, maybe seeking confirmation of their own wise detachment. Can you believe they did that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Validation seeking.
Seeking external validation, specifically looking for reassurance that the excluded group were the flawed ones, not them. And most dangerously, perhaps, every interaction with those friends afterward would be tainted by this subtle judgment and stiffness, reinforcing the distance, making things awkward.
And the consequence is predictable, really, and quite tragic in a way. This path leads you to find yourself emotionally safe, maybe, but ultimately without a lot of friends, without a lot of social plans, and utterly confused as to why the supposedly empowering theory isn't working to actually make your life better.
It fails because it substitutes the true goal, which is usually connection and belonging, with the counterfeit goal of judgment and moral superiority.
Counterfeit goal, I like that.
When we focus only on the flaws of others to justify our detachment, we create a barrier.
Yeah.
We use the emotional energy that really should be spent connecting, and we redirect it into maintaining that superior moral distance. It takes energy to stay up there.
That brings us right to the core issue here,
Mhm.
the moral superiority fallacy. Everyone, fundamentally, wants great, fun, fulfilling relationships, right?
Of course.
They want to be included on the trip, invited over to watch the game, asked to join drinks with the cool coworkers. Connection and belonging, they're foundational human drivers. They're definitely not optional extras for most people.
So we absolutely must ask the critical question, the one the sources demand we face honestly. How exactly does feeling morally superior help you actively create those great friendships? How does it foster genuine mutual connection?
Right. How does sitting up high help you get invited down low?
The answer is crystal clear. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Superiority is a static, defensive position. It creates this kind of transactional expectation where others have to meet your idealized standard before you'll even risk engagement or vulnerability.
So that moment of let them, it's powerful because it relieves the initial pain. And let's be honest, it feels incredibly gratifyingly good sometimes to blame other people and feel better than them. It's like a neurological rush of justification.
It really is.
But that is the absolute limit of its utility. It stops way short of providing fulfillment or growth. If all you use let them for is detachment, you end up emotionally safe, maybe, but completely isolated and ultimately unfulfilled.
The research is quite forceful on this point. They feel, and I think we should too, obligated to warn that stopping at let them practically guarantees isolation down the line. Blaming others, even if they were genuinely disrespectful or lazy or thoughtless, it's ultimately a mechanism of withdrawal, not connection.
Okay.
We require the second half of the equation to translate that temporary feeling of stability and power into meaningful constructive action. That action is the bridge out of the isolation trap.
Okay, so this brings us to the major breakthrough, really, and the essential warning built into this whole theory. Let them is merely the stabilization maneuver. It's just the first half of the equation. You simply cannot stop there, or you risk turning empowerment into emotional atrophy and social withdrawal.
Exactly. The real reliable source of your lasting power is not, and actually has never been, in trying to manage or predict or control other people's behavior. That is a game you will always, always lose.
Yeah, trying to control others is exhausting.
True power rests entirely in managing your response and, crucially, your subsequent action. This is the moment where "let me" enters the frame and changes everything.
So defining let me.
Yeah.
It's really defining proactive responsibility, isn't
Yeah.
it? It means stepping up immediately after the initial detachment, after you've stabilized yourself, shielded yourself from the hurt, and deliberately deciding what you will do next to move toward your goals, regardless of their past actions.
Yes. When you consciously say "let me," you're actively tapping back into your personal agency. You're taking full responsibility for what you do, what standards you set for yourself, what boundary you might need to reinforce, or what opportunity you are going to create next.
It forces you out of passive victim mode.
Immediately, out of a passive reactive victim posture and straight into a position of deliberate generative choice. It fundamentally says, okay, they made their choice, now I make mine.
And this realization, just the realization that you are in control of the next step, that feels transformative in itself. Let's reapply this quickly to our core scenarios, moving from just passive defense to active offense in a good way.
Okay, take the work scenario. Your idea was dismissed, the meeting moved on. Let them stabilize you, preventing the internal spiral of, I'm not good enough.
Right, stop the bleeding.
But "let me" takes over immediately, it says. Let me schedule a follow-up meeting with a key decision maker, maybe one-on-one, to discuss the long-term feasibility, maybe bring new data, or let me find a different internal champion for this idea, someone outside that immediate group who might see its value.
Ah, okay. It shifts the energy.
Completely, from self-pity or resentment to strategic execution.
That's a huge difference. You stop waiting for validation from that group and start actively building a new path for the idea yourself. Okay, now consider the ghosting scenario. Let them provided that crucial shield. Let them disappear. Their behavior disqualifies them from my time.
Essential first step. But "let me" demands action that reinforces your self-worth and standards. It says, let me delete this contact and block this number so I don't even give myself the option to reach out again in a moment of weakness.
Ooh, practical. I like that.
Let me redirect the time and emotional energy I was spending obsessing over their silence toward organizing a fun, productive outing with people who have already demonstrated mutual respect and consistency in my life. It's about actively creating new, healthy, emotional architecture, not just passively waiting.
Building, not just blocking.
Okay.
And finally, the friendship scenario, the sting of the couch reaction. Let them grant you that freedom from the burning sting of exclusion. Okay, let them take their trip. Their choices are theirs, not mine.
Crucial detachment. But "let me" then requires vulnerable, proactive action. It means realizing that sitting alone in your superiority definitely won't get you invited next time.
Right. It achieves nothing for connection.
So, let me reach out next week and plan a completely different, new, engaging activity myself. Invite them, maybe others too, and demonstrate actively that I am an initiator of fun and connection. Or, if this is a pattern, if repeated exclusion is the real issue,
Yeah.
then maybe it's, let me consciously spend more time cultivating deeper connections with new people or other existing friends who consistently include me in their planning and clearly value my presence.
And that is where the ultimate sustainable reward lies, isn't it? Life is inherently more fun, more social, and vastly more fulfilling when you're not sitting alone in that cold, detached superiority, constantly critiquing the behavior of others from afar.
Superiority is static and is deeply isolating. True connection requires vulnerable movement, requires reaching out, requires action.
We started this deep dive feeling like we are fundamentally defined by others' actions, their silence, their dismissal, their exclusion, and the weight of that felt really oppressive.
It did. And the full, complete equation, "let them" plus "let me," fundamentally moves us to a place where we are entirely defined by our chosen actions and our deliberate reactions.
Right.
"Let them" is the defensive move. It prevents the immediate psychological injury. "Let me" is the generative, offensive move in the best sense that actively creates fulfillment, connection, and growth. You absolutely need both halves working in tandem to achieve genuine, lasting agency.
Wow. We've definitely covered some significant and complex psychological territory today, moving all the way from the painful reality of internalized dismissal to this rigorous two-part framework for regaining and, importantly, utilizing personal control.
Yeah.
We started with feeling left out, invisible, ignored. And we end with the profound realization that the power to shift our situation, it always rests in our next chosen move. It's a really comprehensive shift from just mere detachment to deliberate, value-aligned action.
This deep dive, I think, showed us really clearly that rejection and exclusion, they are inevitable facts of life.
Hmm.
People will make choices that affect us, sometimes carelessly, sometimes intentionally. That's just part of interacting with humans.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
But the feeling of inferiority, that is a choice. The moment we internalize others' disregard as evidence of our own flaw, we surrender our power. It's gone.
Mm.
But when we recognize that their disrespect or their exclusion or their dismissal is solely a reflection of them, their choices, their limitations, their issues, and that our response is entirely about us and our standards and our next move, we instantly regain agency. We regain the ability to define our own future connections and opportunities.
That realization feels like the absolute core of the power equation. Let them is necessary for stability, for sure, but it is deeply insufficient for satisfaction. It stabilizes the pain, yes, but it does not satisfy that fundamental human need for belonging and purpose.
Exactly. It's only half the journey.
Yeah. So we want to leave you, our listeners, with this final provocative thought for the week. Something critical to mull over. You know now that stopping at let them leads to isolation. We've made that pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
So if taking responsibility via Let Me is the path to connection and fulfillment, what specific action, maybe even right now or this week, what specific action would turn a recent moment where you settled for that cold, detached superiority into a moment of desired connection and genuine fulfillment? What bridge that you currently feel maybe too superior or too hurt to cross will you decide to rebuild or perhaps build anew?